To access our render options, we're going to go all the way to the upper right part of the screen, and we are going to see this little camera. Now we can either left click on it to render our scene, or we can right mouse click to open our render options. In the upper left part of our render options, we have our preset render qualities, which allow us to render OpenGL, which we can edit these options for, whether we want a faster scene or a better render, which will take a little bit longer. We can set it to preview, which is by default selected, and we also have final, broadcast, superior, ultra, and then of course our user settings, which we can save and also load in other defined settings. And if we go through these different options and take a look in the render quality, we can see that these options are checked on and off as we move up along the chain. And if we go to our user settings, we can go in and actually select exactly what we want to affect our render and our render quality. Now, of course, the more items you have checked and the more different options you have, the longer it will take the render. Same thing with our percentages and our faster and better options. If I go to our subray options for trace reflections and trace transparency, we can just go to by edit, we can select max trace level and max total internal reflection level. So we can change this from faster to better, and change those options as well to edit our scene. And we also have those options for depth of field, where we can enable our hybrid 2.5D, which is a better way of rendering our depth of field. So I'm going to close that out right now. We can also adjust our advanced effects quality, and there's many other different options in there as well. Photon maps for radiosity and caustics, and then of course custom settings for indirect lighting and adaptive sampling. A little bit of extra options to improve the overall quality of your scene. We also have our anti-aliasing options for object anti-aliasing, texture anti-aliasing, and then of course our overall anti-aliasing for the scene, where we have many different options. Of course, the more we increase these options, the longer our renders take. And really the best way for you to really see what these different options do is to actually go ahead and test out different renders and see what every single option does. It's really the best way to compare and see how overall changes and small changes can affect our render. If we go back to the left side of our panel, underneath our presets, you'll see that we have our renderer. And now we have our internal renderer, which is the basic view renderer, and if you're not using a network, then you really don't need to worry about anything else. But then we also have our standalone renderer, which we can use the local standalone renderer, which is basically just view by itself, or we can use Hyperview Network Manager, which will allow us to edit over many different machines and render over several machines. And then if you're using an external renderer, an outside program, third-party renderer, you can use the renderable network to plug into that. And now we're going to take a look at our picture size and resolution on the right side, upper right of our panel. We can see our aspect ratio. This allows us to select different formats for rendering. We can set widescreen, we can do a cinemascope if we're going to be doing film. There are also various picture standards and printing standards in here, letter sizes, and of course we can go back to our standard PC, which is our default, which is just a standard 4:3 regular television render. Our standard PC resolution. We have a few more options in here too, where we have our panoramic view, which will allow us to render an area with a very, very wide angle lens and allowing us to render 360 degrees of our scene. And we also have the spherical render, which will allow us to go around and over our heads and below us as well. And we of course can adjust that actual angle and how many, what degrees we want for, of course, the wide angle of our camera. I'm just going to go ahead and turn those off right now. We can also define our render area numerically within this panel. And the last thing we're going to take a look at is our G buffer. I'm going to enable our G buffer. We're going to go to Edit, and we can also generate multipass. Now what this allows us to do is break up our scene into a Photoshop file or two separate bump map files. And what we can do is define whether we want the Z-depth, material ID, and all these different options to be rendered separately so that we have different images demonstrating exactly what is being affected in each one of these categories. And then our multipass buffer allows us to go even more in depth with that. And we can just render the diffusion, the specularity, ambience, and all these different options. And that way, if you do this for your scene, and because maybe there's something wrong with it, something that needs to be changed, you can break down your scene and see exactly what it is that needs to be changed without any guessing.